Israel was living in a time of darkness. The people had rejected the covenant, and as a consequence, God allowed the Philistines, sea warriors who had mastered iron while Israel still used bronze, to become rulers of the land. They took the harvests, imprisoned families, and for 40 years turned Israel into a humiliated nation. But God hadn't forgotten his promise. In a small village of the tribe of Dan, there was a humble couple, Manoah and his wife, marked by the pain of not being able to have children, a wound that mirrored Israel's own barrenness. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and announced that a deliverer would be born from her. That child would be Samson, a man set apart from the womb, called to confront the oppressor. He would tear a lion apart with his bare hands, defeat armies, and prove that true strength comes from God. But Samson would also come to know his own weakness, his fascination with women and his overconfidence in himself. When he fell, he discovered that God could still use him, and in his final act he brought down the enemy's temple to show that the glory wasn't his, but the Lord's. Want to hear more stories like this and grow in your faith? Subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a like. The woman heard the message. Even though she was barren, she would give birth to a son. She was also told to live carefully, to not drink wine or any strong drink, and to avoid anything unclean, because the boy would be set apart for God from the womb and would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Still shaken, she ran to tell her husband. Manoah, reverent and curious, asked the Lord to send the messenger again so they could learn how to raise the child. God answered. The angel returned and repeated the instructions about the Nazirite vow: no wine, no impurity, and never let a razor touch the boy's head. Grateful, Manoah offered a sacrifice on the rock. When the flame rose up to heaven, the angel went up with it and disappeared, leaving the couple certain that God would fulfill what he had promised. Filled with fear and hope, they understood that this child would be born with a purpose and that it was their duty to obey. And so they waited for the day their son would come. Manoah was overcome with fear and told his wife they were doomed because they had seen God. But she, strong in faith, replied that if the Lord wanted to destroy them, he wouldn't have accepted their sacrifice or revealed such great secrets, much less made a promise. From that home marked by barrenness would come the deliverer of Israel. The boy was named Samson, meaning little son, a sign that in the shadow of the Philistines, the light of God would rise. From an early age, the Spirit moved him with unusual strength, but inside him another struggle was growing: to obey his calling or to live like any other young man. Behind the muscles was a heart torn between heaven and his own impulses, and that conflict would open the door to many sorrows. When Samson reached adulthood, all of Israel talked not only about his extraordinary strength, but also about the impulsive way he made decisions. One day he went down to Timnah, a Philistine city, the people who oppressed Israel and lived far from the Lord's law. There he met a woman who instantly caught his eye. When he came back, he told his parents he wanted her as his wife. They tried to talk him out of it, reminding him that there were women among his own people and that marrying a Philistine could put his covenant with God at risk. But Samson wouldn't back down. He insisted that she was the one he wanted. To everyone else, it looked like youthful stubbornness, but God was already beginning to unfold his plan, and the family set out for Timnah. Deep down, that meeting would become the starting point of the clash between Israel's deliverer and his oppressors. Samson, set apart by God as a Nazirite, had clear restrictions. He couldn't drink wine, touch anything unclean, or cut his hair. Even so, he left the road and walked into a vineyard, a risky place to be. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the roar of a young lion that leapt toward him. He was alone, unarmed, and about to die. But the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him and filled his body. Samson grabbed the animal and tore it apart with his bare hands. No one knew about it. Later, on his way to meet his bride, he returned to the spot where he had killed the lion. He kept it to himself, knowing it hadn't been human strength but divine intervention. When Samson found the carcass of the lion he had killed, he noticed something unexpected. Bees had made a honeycomb inside it. He reached in, took some honey, tasted it, and kept walking. He even gave some to his parents but didn't tell them where it came from. That gesture, which seemed harmless, actually revealed a serious flaw, because a Nazirite wasn't supposed to touch anything unclean. Even so, Samson kept testing the limits of God's calling. On the day of his wedding, during the Philistine feast filled with music, drinking, and 30 men around him, he wanted to show off and posed a riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. That atmosphere of excess was exactly the kind of place he should have avoided, but his overconfidence pushed him toward showing off. During the 7 days of celebration, Samson made a challenge. If they solved his riddle, they'd get 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if they couldn't, they'd have to pay him the same. 3 days went by with no answer, and the group, growing restless, decided to pressure his wife. They threatened to burn her and her father's house if she didn't get the answer out of him. Frightened, she went to Samson, crying and saying he didn't really love her. But he stood firm, saying he hadn't even told his parents. Still, she kept pressing him day after day. Samson held out as long as he could, but on the 7th day, worn down by her persistence, he revealed the secret. She ran and told her people, and before sunset the Philistines showed up with the answer. What's sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion? Samson realized he'd been betrayed and, furious, said they had plowed with his heifer, making it clear they'd used his wife to get the riddle out of him, turning his game into humiliation. Filled with the Spirit of the Lord, he went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 men, and gave their clothes to those who had solved the riddle. Wounded and angry, he went back to his father's house. After some time, he tried to make peace and brought a young goat as a gesture of reconciliation. But his father-in-law stopped him, explaining that he had given his wife to another man and suggesting he take her younger sister instead to settle things, something that only deepened Samson's sense of disgrace. Samson saw his self-control crumble. The woman he had risked entering enemy territory for had been given to another man as if he meant nothing. The humiliation turned into rage, and he decided that this time he wouldn't feel guilty for what he was about to do to the Philistines. The insult had struck both his honor and the God he represented. So he came up with an unexpected plan for revenge. He caught 300 foxes, tied them in pairs, fastened burning torches to their tails, and let them loose through the fields. Not even the storehouses escaped the flames that spread with the wind. The fire swept through the grain fields, vineyards, and olive groves, destroying the entire harvest. When the Philistines found out that Samson, their Timnite son-in-law, had done it because they had taken his wife, they set out for retaliation. The house of the Timnites was set on fire, and with it died Samson's wife and her father. When Samson heard about it, it felt like his heart had been torn out. The love that had led him to Timnah had been destroyed because of him. So he decided they would pay dearly. He went after the Philistines like a storm breaking loose, using all the strength God had given him, and many fell before him. Then, exhausted and still hurting inside, he hid in the rock of Etam, trying to catch his breath away from the bloodshed. But the Philistines wouldn't let the insult go. They marched into Judah and camped at Lehi. The men of Judah, terrified and unwilling to fight, heard them say, "We've come to capture Samson and do to him what he did to us." So the people of Judah decided to step in. 3,000 men went down to the cave where Samson was hiding, not to help him but to hand him over. When they saw him, they said with reproach, "Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? Why did you do this?" To them, Samson wasn't a deliverer but the cause of the enemy's anger. He replied, "I only did to them what they did to me." Even so, they said, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to them." Samson could have fought back, but he saw the fear in his people and recognized God's hand at work. He only asked that they not kill him themselves. They agreed, tied him up with 2 new ropes, and led him away. When he reached Lehi, the Philistines shouted, certain they finally had him. But they didn't know that this apparent victory would be the beginning of the turnaround God had planned. Samson was tied up and surrounded when the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes fell apart like burned cords and dropped to the ground. He looked for something to defend himself with and saw only the jawbone of a freshly killed donkey. He grabbed it and charged. Dust rose, the Philistines shouted, and one by one they fell until 1,000 men lay dead before him. Gasping for breath, Samson declared that with a simple jawbone he had defeated them all, showing that the victory came from God, not from the weapon. But the effort left him on the edge of collapse. Thirst was consuming him. So he cried out to the Lord, afraid he might die right there and see his triumph lose its meaning. God heard him and opened a crack in the ground, and water gushed out. Samson drank, revived, and the place was named En-Hakkore, the spring of the one who cried out. Strengthened, he went on to judge Israel. For 20 years, Samson led Israel under Philistine rule. They feared him because they knew that even though they controlled the region, one strike from him could change everything. As his fame grew, so did their hatred. Samson was the unpredictable enemy, the blow that came out of nowhere. But the man who terrified armies still had the same weakness. On impulse, he went down to Gaza, a walled city full of soldiers, just to spend the night with a prostitute. The news spread quickly. The Philistines locked the city gates, set guards in place, and decided to wait until sunrise, convinced that this time he wouldn't escape and they could finally kill him. They thought desire had completely clouded the hero's judgment. Samson didn't wait for daylight. At midnight, he got up and went to the city gates, massive wooden doors with iron hinges and huge posts. He grabbed the whole structure with his hands, tore it out, and hoisted it onto his shoulders. What would have taken many men to carry, he hauled for miles all the way to Hebron, in the mountains of Israel. And there he planted the gates like someone raising a defiant banner for all to see. Anyone who saw it understood. The Philistines' defenses were just a facade, and God still upheld his judge. But while Samson's fame spread among nations and soldiers, a new trap was already being set, more subtle and far more dangerous, ready to change his destiny forever beyond his sight. In the valley of Sorek, Samson's story took a different turn. That's where he met Delilah, a woman with no title or sword but a sharp mind. The hero who could take down entire armies found himself vulnerable before her charm. Seeing this, the Philistines spotted their opportunity and sent their 5 rulers to strike a deal. They promised Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver, a fortune big enough to buy anyone's conscience, if she could find out where the Israelites' strength came from and how he could be subdued. Tempted by the reward, she agreed, and in a soft voice asked, "Tell me, Samson, what's the secret of your strength, and how could someone tie you up and overpower you?" Confident as ever, he answered playfully, "If they tie me up with 7 fresh leather straps, still wet, I'll become as weak as any other man." That night, while Samson was asleep, Delilah tied him up with the 7 straps and kept soldiers hidden, waiting. When she shouted the agreed signal, "Samson, the Philistines are coming for you," he woke up and snapped everything apart with ease, as if it were nothing. His secret was still safe, and her first attempt failed completely. Unwilling to give up, Delilah came back with a hurt tone and asked for the truth. He gave in a little but lied again, saying that if he were tied up with new ropes, he'd lose his strength. She repeated the plan, called the men, and he broke the ropes just like before. Her frustration grew, but her hunger for the reward spoke louder. For the 3rd time, she got another answer out of him, to weave his 7 braids into a loom and pin them down. She waited until he fell asleep, did exactly that, and shouted the warning again. But even then, when Samson heard her call, he jumped up, pulled the loom along with him, and undid the whole setup, showing that his secret was still safe. He woke up startled, and in a burst of strength, broke free from the bindings and tore the entire loom out, carrying it with him. 3 times she had tested him, and 3 times she failed. Delilah realized that seduction alone wasn't enough, so she turned to what hurt most, his emotions. She cried, accused him, and hinted that his love wasn't real because he kept secrets from her. Her persistence became a daily burden until it wore Samson down completely. Exhausted, he confessed. From the womb, he had been a Nazirite, set apart for God, and that was why his hair had never been cut. His strength was tied to that symbol. If it were shaved off, he'd become just like any other man, powerless. Delilah knew he had finally opened his heart. She quickly called for the Philistines, and trusting her, Samson fell asleep in her lap. The Philistines came back with silver and a shared purpose. While Samson slept, Delilah called a man who, braid by braid, erased a vow of 20 years. When the 7th braid fell, the covenant fell with it. The Bible sums it up, and his strength left him. Delilah shouted again, and he woke up. Sure, he could break free like before, but the Lord was no longer with him. Captured, he couldn't break the ropes. The champion of Israel had become just another man, and the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, condemning him to darkness. That was the end of the warrior Israel had once admired. Taken to Gaza in bronze chains, Samson, the former deliverer of Israel, was forced to grind grain like an animal, exposed to shame. It seemed like the end, but in the darkness of the prison another story began. Without sight, strength, or freedom, he realized it hadn't been his hair that sustained him, but his dependence on the God he had taken for granted. There he understood that his downfall had come from self-confidence and distance from the Lord, that no achievement could protect him without obedience. When he humbled himself, God visited him again, and his hair began to grow back, a sign that the covenant could be restored, and that the fallen could rise again. In that way, the defeated hero discovered that restoration begins first in the heart. The story wasn't over. Even in defeat, he was still part of God's plan. Meanwhile, the Philistines, full of excitement, prepared a great celebration to honor Dagon, a god who to them symbolized power and prosperity. It wasn't just a religious ceremony. It was a show of strength, a statement that their God had triumphed over the God of Israel. The temple filled with leaders and spectators, all eager to see Gaza's former terror put on display. Then they brought Samson in, blind and led by a servant. While the crowd mocked him, Samson turned to the boy who was leading him and asked to be placed near the pillars that held up the temple. Without suspecting anything, the boy led him to the center of the structure. As Samson touched the 2 pillars, he realized he had in his hands the chance to end both the mockery and the enemy's rule. Then he lifted his voice and said, "Lord, remember me. Please give me strength just this once so I may avenge my eyes." He now understood that his strength wasn't his own. It came from the God who still hurt him, and he decided to pour out all of it in that moment. He placed his right hand on one pillar and his left on the other. The noise of the celebration nearly drowned out his short prayer. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold stone, and with a cry that echoed through the whole temple, he shouted, "Let me die with the Philistines." The pillars gave way, the roof shook, and laughter turned to panic. Stone and wood came crashing down like a flood, burying guests and rulers alike. No one had time to escape. The ground trembled, the air filled with dust, and the shouting fell silent. When the dust finally settled, the hall had become a mass grave. In that single act, Samson killed more enemies than he had in his entire life, but he fell with them. His story shows us that we are fragile, and that God often reaches us when everything seems to fall apart. Maybe you're in that place of exhaustion and silence, thinking it's over. But the Lord can use what's been broken to bring purpose. He can turn failure into growth and weakness into victory. If someone needs to hear this, share it. May this message lift you up today. And if you want to go deeper into the stories that reveal how God works through time, keep walking in the Word and teaching others.